everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Directors Club, another sequel episode, if you will, because we love to talk about our favorite filmmakers, and today's choice is no exception for both me and my guest. Not to mention the fact that wow, this is a shocker. The last time we talked about this director was way back in 2011 with this exact same guest. I'm talking about someone who has been on the show every year for the 30-year retrospective at the very least. He's also the host of Movie Madness and The Friendship Dilemma, co-host of that, a member of the Chicago Film Critics Association, co-creator of the Chicago Critics Film Festival, and I've been listening to this guy talk films going all the way back to the year 2000. Welcome back, Erik Childress.
Hey, man.
Hey, what's up?
How are you? I gotta say, I know we're gonna be talking about time a lot on this episode, I suspect, but hearing that we did this last in 2011, I'm very depressed right now.
It's so weird to think, it was one of our earlier episodes because we started that thing in January of 2011, and we probably recorded that, I want to say August, September? It might have been September.
Yeah, I don't even remember the date. It's amazing. My God.
It's crazy to think that The Dark Knight Rises hadn't come out yet.
Yeah, so we had just covered Inception. That's how far we got?
Yeah. I mean, we covered the majority of his filmography because it was pretty small.
Right. Yeah.
Back then. I think we touched on just about everything. Certainly a couple of titles were just reduced to a paragraph or something. But, for the most part, we did discuss quite a few. And mainly focusing on Memento and The Prestige.
Right. That I remember we streamlined it a little bit.
Yes. Because that was back when I was like, let's just keep it to 2 movies.
And 6 hours later on every other 30-year podcast that we've done, or that was the 30-year podcast that we've done, we've forgoed that lesson.
It's a wacky show because it's changed hosts, it's changed formats. I understand, if people are, I prefer the old era of Directors Club, or I prefer the Brad Nall years, or whatever, but I kind of like the fact that I just keep coming up with weird things, or based on whoever the guest is, just sort of let them sort of dictate how things go, more or less. I mean, I do kind of like the idea of what we're doing today, to where I might ask each guest in the future if they would like to do this. And I am not using the term draft, people. The term draft is off the table.
Yeah.
We are calling this a collaborative ranking of the filmmakers' titles. We're not doing any vetoes. We're basically just going to try to come to a consensus. We did something similar for Richard Donner, but that was more based on a draft. And I don't want to do that anymore.
A traditional draft that is done everywhere.
Now it certainly is.
Well, certainly. But no, this is going to show the true spirit of critical compromise here in what we're doing here.
Yeah, and I like that idea. I like using the word compromise.
Yeah. Well, let's see. If there's a 9 on one list and a 1 on the other, that might be hard to reckon. But I don't think that's going to happen on this episode.
Right.
Maybe a movie, a director with a lot more movies, you can have some problems. But this is, very, it's a great resume, but it's still, compared to a lot of directors, it's not the biggest resume.
Yes, I don't know. Could we do this with Spielberg? Could we do this with Zemeckis? I'm sure we could.
Give it a shot.
I don't know how that would go. Oof.
I think that a lot of these, if you do continue to do this, I bet in most cases, your bottom 3 are not going to be that dissimilar. When you get into the middle and the top, that's when it gets hard. But I think when you get to the bottom stuff, I think there will be a compromise of what people will say are the lesser of someone's resume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I think that will start with tonight.
Yeah, so each of us are going to sort of make our case of placement. I mean, I'm sure you share this with me as well. I'm a huge fan of lists.
I do. I enjoy Letterboxd for many reasons, but that being one of them.
Well, that's also what's interesting too. Is I'm seeing more and more people. I wouldn't say there's like a backlash against ranking or even putting stars on a movie, but I do see people using Letterboxd as just like, oh, I just watched this movie and I'm not even going to rank it. It's just a diary, right?
Yeah, which is fine too.
Oh yeah, I'm not like saying that's bad or wrong.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to rank anything. We just like to rank stuff. I mean, I like the idea of ranking stuff as an individual more than say, like, this is the ranking, this is definitive, and this is what you have to follow. I don't think that when I make a ranking, I'm making a ranking that's personal. This is what I believe. If you don't believe it, that's fine. But don't call me a son of a bitch because I think differently than you do. But I'll make the case against what you might think or whatever, and I'll listen to yours as well. But I don't think that, even AFI is not a definitive ranking of anything. So, and everyone, not even the Sight and Sound is a definitive ranking.
Oh, exactly.
I know some of the people who vote in that, so it can't be.
Yeah, I often get, I don't know, I mean, it is like when you start using the best, like this is the definitive best movie of all time, that sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, you have to get away, ranked is ranked, but ranked to an individual, ranked for whatever reasons they have for ranking things in a certain way. If you just say, this is the definitive list, and this is my, I'm saying this, well, no. You can't do that.
No, but there are critics that I won't name that often say you're an idiot for liking something or not liking something, for not agreeing with them, or and that's the thing too. It's like, I understand when you put out these are the best movies of the year, you have to understand, people, it's coming from that person. It's not saying these are the definitive best movies and that's that's where the conversation ends. You have
to understand. I think it's interesting when people, you look at everyone's rankings, and everyone's rankings are very different. You have maybe a couple people in your circumference, and you just have 3 or 4 movies on your list that are similar, different rankings, but similar. Mm-hmm. And I think it's when you get to those rare instances where you can have agreement on what the best movie of the year is, or even half of your top 10 list, there's something to that. There's something a little more definitive to that when you can have a consensus on greatness. And people will disagree with that. But, I think, when people, kind of poo-poo Rotten Tomatoes and whatnot, and there are variables and whatnot that go into those percentage rankings and stuff like that too. But there is something to see a collective group of people respond in many of the same ways to a particular work of art that is comforting in a way. I think when you see people argue, one person says this is the best movie of the year, the other person says it's the worst. Where do you go with that? Honestly, you really almost can't have a conversation with that.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. I wasn't necessarily gung-ho about debate in speech class when I had that in high school. Because I don't know, it's one of those things, too, where maybe I just want to get along with everybody. But I don't necessarily like arguing. That's not my forte. I'm comfortable in expressing my opinion on something, but it's just a matter of, it gets exhausting, especially if they're coming from a completely different place.
Well, it's only exhausting for me when you realize that person isn't listening to you. They're if they say their piece and you have your piece, and then they're just shaking their head no, no, whatever it might be, and it could be something controversial, it could be something middling, or whatever it might be. when you can't get through to someone, like I can listen to someone I completely disagree with and go, okay, I see where you're coming from.
Sure, yeah.
But I don't agree with that, and I don't think that that's how I view any particular part of any particular film. But I go like, I see where you're coming from as an individual or your viewpoint towards that, because we're all snowflakes. We're all different. We all approach things in different ways. That's why we don't all have the same top 10 lists. There are 12 movies, right? I'm not okay. I'm not missing one on this list.
Yeah, I'm not going to include short films if he's made any.
No, I don't.
But I don't know. Like, maybe it's just a simple and safe bet to go with what I went with for number 12, because it's a movie I like and never truly loved because it feels like a debut. Mm-hmm. I think you know where I'm going. Following. I mean, it's definitely a confident debut. I mean, it reminds me of what Aronofsky did with Pi, and it serves as a calling card and definitely a taste of things to come from Nolan. But I'm just not passionate about it the way I am with a lot of his other work. I would probably say like the first 4 or 5 titles on here, more or less, I think are very good movies. I don't know if I would say they're great. Okay. I appreciate this film. I certainly love the neo-noir element. I love that it's in black and white. The themes and ideas are strong and they resonate. But it just feels like blueprints. You know, it feels like what we're about, like something bigger. The bigger picture is yet to come in terms of what he's hinting at here with themes like voyeurism, and to some extent just manipulation and memory. But I just feel like this is where it belongs, even though like there's a couple of titles here that I could see switching it out with as well, if you feel differently.
Yeah, and I would make the case, because it isn't my number 12, but because when I look at Following, which I'm with you on the same wavelength, that is good. It's it's certainly not great, but I think that more than most debuts that you see from any particular filmmaker or filmmaking group, the blueprint that you see is such a rare thing, and you could see skills, you could see technique and stuff like that in people's debuts and stuff like that, but rarely do you see the blueprint for almost an entire career.
Sure.
The themes that they're exploring. Like even like Spielberg, like you can't necessarily say that particularly about like Sugarland Express or Duel, whatever you consider the first movie is. You see again technique and skill, but those sort of themes that he would come to probably don't really start until maybe Close Encounters, I would think. Yeah. The arguments that can be made, but I think with this one, with those the kind of twists and turns, the time narrative, that stuff, I think it's a really interesting way to go. Oh, this is we're gonna get later. That's why I don't have it at number 12. I think it's a good movie. I think it's cool that Criterion has it in their collection. It's one that I've only seen once, honestly, but it's an interesting once. Yeah, and it always has been for me.
No, I definitely agree. There's also a alternate version of it. I think it's similar to Memento, where it's like there's a chronological version of it that people can watch if they choose to do that. Maybe it plays easier. I don't know. I don't think that would be nearly as interesting, and certainly one of the strengths of Nolan as a storyteller is often doing the nonlinear narrative, or just like challenging us in terms of the way he tells a story,
right?
To where you really have to pay attention. This is not an instance of you can just multitask while watching this. You'll be completely lost if you do that, and that's true of a lot of his work. What would be your number 12? Like, I mean, I have a feeling I might know, but
when you look at that list, I mean, I think there's only one other option on there, and I was hoping a rewatch might bump it up a spot or two, but I really got to say that my number 12 is still Tenet. That because I think that this is a case where his own ideas get away from him, and whatever is going on in that crazy brain of his, this I think is the one time that he wasn't really able to successfully communicate what was going on up there to his audience, and yet it's a movie that it's kind of impossible to hate in a way, because I mean there are so many cool ideas running through it, but I think that as a whole and as a narrative, it's hamstrung by a few things. One of them, I think, being his lead actor, John David Washington.
Completely agree.
Who I think is like, you need someone in that role who isn't trying to be as cool as he is. And I know that the movie is clearly has a James Bond model and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But that character should not be James Bond. I know he is, quote-unquote, the protagonist, but he is, I mean, while he's skillful, and I think John W. Washington in the physical stuff in the movie does shine through. I think that the physical representation of that character, I think, works, but like there are times when he's cracking jokes, and I think he needs to be a little bit more in wonderment about the crazy shit that's going on in that film, and for him to play it as kind of a cool vibe when he's almost taken out in the first 10 minutes of the movie, I don't think there should be as, I don't know, there's a confidence in that character that I think that needs to be a little bit more in touch with the audience's kind of view of what the hell is happening here.
Yeah, he should have been more like Tom Cruise in Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because like there's a line early in the movie that almost seems like Nolan just had to put in, where and it's really, I mean, it's like 15 minutes of the movie we're getting the big scene where the scientist is explaining to the audience what's happening with the inverted bullets. Mm-hmm. Right? It should be like the key scene of the movie, and it happens 15 minutes in to set this whole thing up. I still don't frickin' understand it. I don't. I've watched that scene. I've started watching this movie like 5 times since it premiered, and I've only gotten about 45 minutes into it before I just like put it on pause and just never went back to it until just a few hours ago.
Don't try to understand it, Eric. Feel it.
That's the line I'm talking about. That's exactly the line I'm talking about. And when she said, and every time she says it, I laugh.
Yeah,
I laugh because I think because that's kind of the key to the movie. But at the same time, they have to explain everything over and over and over and over again. And while I will defend that to the death out of at least one other movie we're going to be talking about on this, in this one, it just felt like there's a desperation to tell us how things are happening, and it still doesn't entirely make sense to me. I think that like when you finally get like an hour and a half in and you realize, or like John David Washington's the protagonist purposely inverts himself, so he's now the one going backwards in time while everything else is going forward, then to see it from that perspective gives us a greater view of what was happening earlier in the movie in a couple of those scenes.
Oh yeah.
I think that like that's a key moment. I think that works, but at the same time, I still don't understand like the bullet things. It's like you play with a bullet, you have to catch the bullet. I'm like, well, why is that? That's stupid. Like, why is it catching the bullet? Like, why is the bullet coming? I can't explain it. I'm not in Nolan's mind. He's probably looking at me thinking I'm an idiot for not understanding the brilliance of it. But again, there's cool stuff in the movie. Watching it in the score and the special effects, and I think that he's started to become more confident in his action scenes over the years, and this is another example of that. But the story is, I mean, it's funny to watch over time all these directors we talked about, how all of them have wanted to do a James Bond movie. Spielberg wanted to do a James Bond movie, and they wouldn't let him do it, so he put Sean Connery as Indiana Jones' dad instead. James Cameron had talked about doing a Bond movie. He just did True Lies. They don't ever seem to want Nolan to do a James Bond movie, so he just does Tenet.
Sure. Yeah.
And then he's got then the stuff between Branagh and Elizabeth Debicki is really ugly.
Yeah, that does.
Very.
It's. This is interesting. Well, obviously, I'm totally fine with putting this at number 12 because this is my number 11. And it makes sense. I mean, I we'll hear from former co-host Patrick. He loves this movie quite a bit more and likens it to a lost Bond movie. And and I've never been too much of a Bond guy, and I don't know if it's like, I don't know, but at the same time, it's part of me is like just wants to focus on like, okay, he's a secret agent. He's trying to prevent World War III. He's trying to save, the damsel in distress, I guess, and that's pretty much all. But then, like, so much is happening throughout. I start feeling dumb at one point where I'm just like, I don't know if I can follow this, and I try, and especially the final act, I'm completely lost, and I try to understand it, and I'm certain like people have broken this movie down, or in the same way they've come up with theories on Reddit on certain films. Maybe people have deconstructed this movie to make it make sense, and I'm sure it does, but I also don't get invested in a way that makes me want to make sense of it all. And in the end, I just mostly go, well, that was a cool sequence. And I certainly like it once he does get to go back in time through that time portal machine thing, whatever it is. I certainly love watching him. Like, I just like Nolan. I like it when Nolan crafts really great set pieces, and that highway chase in reverse is just cool to watch, and it's fun. And certainly the hallway fight. I love that. I love watching, and then certainly once we find out the protagonist is fighting himself, I mean, all that stuff is cool. That's why maybe I put this a notch higher, only because following doesn't have cool action sequences that I'm just like, well, I enjoyed watching that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I could go either way with the collaborative ranking of this movie, because when we get a little higher up in the list, that was sort of a criteria that I started using myself. Was like, I kind of enjoy this movie a little bit more, but I can't deny the skill and all of the ideas and stuff that go into a few of these other movies that I have to rank them higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, again, plot-wise, though, it's Kenneth Branagh's an asshole, and that's like he's basically like just being the villain and eating and chewing up scenery, but I also don't. Unlike other Nolan movies, I don't necessarily care about Elizabeth Debicki being reunited with her child and all the stuff that, like, I'm surprised that I don't give a damn about, and I'm surprised how little I care about John David Washington and the relationship he has with Robert Pattinson. Like, I almost wondered if Robert Pattinson was the lead, if that would have changed things or made me perk up a little bit more.
Well, I mean, he's charming John David Washington right off the screen.
Yeah.
In every scene he's in. I mean, he's in, and I want to talk about just irony, that I didn't even realize, I completely forgot, as I usually do when he appears in movies, that Aaron Taylor Johnson was even in this movie. It was not until he takes off his mask later in the movie, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait, is that Aaron Taylor Johnson? I'm like, and this is the guy they want to be the next James Bond? No, thank you.
Ugh. No, thank you, indeed.
If I forget that you're in a Christopher Nolan movie, you don't have any screen charisma.
Yep. But then again, I love that line. Don't try to understand it, just feel it, and that could be true of a lot of movies.
Well, that's a good piece of advice for a lot of Nolan movies.
Yeah. That's why I was like, is this a response to people who,
Right.
you know?
Well, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, it's... If you had following at 11, or do you? Or do you not?
Yeah, I am following 11.
Okay. So, gosh, I mean, again, I'm also not going to fight you on this either. Like, because
the irony that one of these has to go forward and one of them has to go backwards. If that.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to number 10. And we could debate it later. I'm good either way. You're good either way. It's already being collaborative, so this is how we roll.
Yeah, I'm happy with this so far.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So again, like I just rewatched this one fairly recently with my mom, and we were both really engrossed with Insomnia, which is my number 10. And perhaps, like, on one hand, I'm like, well, it's a remake that maybe didn't need to be remade, but when you have a cast like this and Nolan at the helm, how can you not be curious at the very least, especially since this was his follow-up to Memento, and you're like, well, what's next for this guy? And
Right.
I was definitely surprised, and I don't want to say like, oh, it's entirely straightforward, but it doesn't have the narrative trickery of something like Memento, to where anybody could probably, it might be one of his more accessible movies in that regard. Like, it's just a straightforward sort of murder mystery that becomes something else entirely once the murderer, quote unquote, is revealed. And I think the two central performances here are really what makes it so compelling. You know, just the fact, the setting of where everything takes place here in Alaska, is really, you know, just the fact that, okay, you're exposed to sunlight the entire time and you won't be able to sleep, and we get to basically watch Al Pacino's detective character slowly disintegrate and just like practically lose his mind. I think just as on the level of these two performances with Pacino and Robin Williams, which is an interesting year for Robin Williams, that's for sure. I still think this is an interesting Nolan movie about identity. Like, the themes are there, you know, and putting it in the context of something, I don't want to reduce it to like, well, this is just kind of like a Law and Order episode, feature length, but, you know, at the same time, like the murder mystery, I wouldn't necessarily reduce it to that either. It's just, there's no like, oh my God, like a huge shock or a huge reveal necessarily that kicks it up a notch in the end. Like, I think the only strike I ever put against this movie is like, yeah, it kind of plays out exactly the way I expected it to play out. But that doesn't make it a lesser movie because of that. I think that this is got a really great Pacino performance. For that reason alone, it's worth seeking out. And certainly seeing Robin Williams do what he does here is fascinating too. But it doesn't linger with me, you know, in terms of what Nolan has done time and time again with a lot of his films, in terms of being these really fascinating and original like pieces of escapism that also provoke a lot of thought and ideas. This is just like kind of a solid thriller, you know, and that's not bad either. Like, if he made another Insomnia after something like Oppenheimer, I'd be all for it, actually, you know. You know, simplify things again and just tell a simple, you know, 100-minute thriller. Go for it, man. I do like Insomnia, but I'm just not passionate about it again like the other ones coming up. So
yeah, well, my number 10 is Insomnia as well.
Yes.
And yeah, you don't have to worry about shifting this one. And this, I mean, because I remember when I first saw Insomnia at the press screening back in 2002, and you know, there's whenever someone has a debut as striking as Memento, or I mean, it wasn't really his debut, but it was sort of, I mean, Following was his debut, but Memento was sort of the coming out party of Christopher Nolan, right? That was the one that really got him the attention. One was at Slamdance, the other was at Sundance. So enough said. And so you're always kind of looking for that sophomore slump a little bit. Like, you know, so he had like this really great gimmick movie that just happened to be pretty fantastic. You know, is he going to slide with something a little more conventional and a remake to boot? So it's not even like his idea, and that it kind of shows. But at the same time, you see Nolan's stamp on this material, particularly in the editing. There's a lot of little carves into flashbacks, and you're not quite sure what you're witnessing in a couple moments and whatnot, going through Pacino's mind and stuff, until it's revealed towards the end of the movie. You know what you've been witnessing the entire time, and yet it's a completely absorbing thriller. And I watched this not too long ago. My Friendship Dilemma co-host Morgan Geyer was also doing a Christopher Nolan podcast, so we were all in text while she was watching something, and when she was in the middle of insomnia, I'm like, well, I got to put this on because I got to be able to comment because I hadn't seen it in a while, and so we had a little back and forth about it, and she had some rightful criticisms about the way the Hilary Swank character is kind of covered, particularly procedurally. I think that, and I kind of agree with that, but I think it's like one of Pacino's best performances of the last couple decades, which maybe there's not a whole lot of those to go through, but I mean, I think it's a terrific performance, and I think Williams is great as the villain, very cool, and it has a great shootout at the end of the movie, which I always appreciate. It works for me, and so like going forward, like this is my number 10 on Nolan, and I thought this was when I saw the movie, I said, okay, this guy is someone we have to watch because he did Memento, and now he's taken this remake and he's made it his own thing. I said, like, this guy is just proving to me that he is going to be something going forward, and it's my number 10.
And you're right in that he's somebody. I mean, of course, yeah, and like I was 100% with you on Memento, and it was just it was interesting to see this though, because maybe expectations to some degree, like what kind of mind fucking is he gonna do this time? And yet at the same time, like I you don't need that every time either. You can just tell a story, like and it's a compelling and interesting story. And anytime Pacino and Williams are on that like ferry together, that whole scene is incredible. Yeah,
and he pulls out the tape recorder.
Yes, wild card. Love it. But yeah, I mean, again, like for the most part, we are talking about films that I really, really like. Number 9 is where it's going to get interesting.
I might surprise you at my number 9 too.
Okay, well, I mean, I texted you this. I have to address a caveat. Okay. I was watching The Dark Knight Rises on HBO Max because I don't own this one, and I've decided I don't know if I want to be a subscriber to HBO Max because it was a garbage experience. I mean, like. The sound, okay, so in comparison to watching Interstellar on 4K, my TV volume was at 40. Watching Dark Knight Rises on Max, I had to have it at 90 to hear anything. And I was like, what is going on here? I mean, I don't know if this is like a thing that everybody's experienced or not, but I just noticed that, like, okay, I had to have it at 90 to hear things, and obviously nowadays I just have subtitles on regardless, but Bane's voice was mixed very strangely. It was like super loud at certain points, I mean throughout the whole movie actually, and it was overpowering to where I had to turn down the volume. And I kept thinking to myself, well, maybe if I had watched this on 4K, maybe my experience would have been better, and maybe the rendering of the sound was consistent and much better than it was on Max. And I don't know if that's something like, because everybody talks, this is one thing we can bring up in general with Nolan, because it's a criticism I've heard a lot throughout his filmography, is that sometimes his score or sometimes his movies aren't mixed very well because people can't make out the dialogue for whatever reason. Yeah,
there's a constant criticism ever since, I think, mostly The Dark Knight. I think that's where it kind of started.
Yeah. And I remember experiencing that here and there, mostly like towards the end of his movies, I would notice that. And here's the thing, like we're going to get into the Batman franchise, obviously, at some point, and it's just not something I'm super passionate about the way I know you are. I think these are good movies. I don't think they're poorly made. They're some of the better examples of comic book movies. I just don't feel as much of an investment in what happens because, for the most part, I know the outcome. I know who's the villain. I know who's the superhero. I know how things are going to play out. So there's very little suspense. And this one is just kind of how I felt on first viewing. It's a little overstuffed. It's a little dense, and for me, the villain isn't as memorable as obviously the one we had before in Dark Knight. But I'm not saying that this is a bad movie by any stretch. I am entertained by it. I am certainly enjoying the action sequences. I am certainly enjoying watching, Nolan sort of make commentary on Occupy Wall Street, and watching this post January 6th is also very interesting. So yeah. I will say, like, it's yes, it's at number 9 for me, but I'm also open-minded enough to think another rewatch down the road could bump it up in my mind. It's just, again, like, for some reason these Batman movies are not I'm certainly not in the ballpark that Nick DiGilio is in with these movies. That's not the case at all. I actually do find these compelling and interesting and well-made and well-edited. I just ultimately, when they're over, they kind of leave my mind. But I know you feel more strongly. I'm curious to see what your number 9 is, and if it's this one, I'll be happy. But if it's not, I understand.
Let me throw a caveat into it right now, just so we could talk about The Dark Knight Rises for a moment, because we're not far off on a ranking. It is my number 8. Okay, but I think we are far off in exactly how much we like this particular movie. And I've seen it several times over the years, and I just did a rewatch for it just a couple days ago on this. And I think this movie gets maybe the biggest bum rap of Nolan's career. I mean, I know because everyone's so high on The Dark Knight, and rightfully so, that it almost seemed like anything that was going to come afterward was going to be a bummer.
Yeah.
And yet, watching this movie again, there are so many ideas running through this thing. You mentioned the Occupy Wall Street stuff, and there's a whole thing in the entire movie about class system and the upper class and the lower class, and Catwoman being someone who's stealing for herself and taking from the rich and stuff like that, and trying to find her own place. She has that speech on the dance floor. She says, the storm is coming, and how are you going to talking to Bruce Wayne, how are you going to sit knowing that you had so much and gave so little to the rest of us? And yet there's also a subplot in the movie about how Bruce Wayne, in his exile, has basically sank his company into the ground, right? And because of that, his philanthropy has shuffled off, that he's not able to give money to the orphanages and all of those things that his father and stuff had set up for him. So it's almost like, the trickle down effect from generations and whatnot is not having the impact that some thought it would. So you got that going on in the movie. And you mentioned January 6th. I mean, the entire sequence where Bane takes over Gotham and unleashes all the prisoners and whatnot. That scene has a potency now that it probably didn't quite. I mean, to me, it had a potency in 2012. I think that this movie is scary as shit. And I mean that even before the events of the past few years.
Sure. Parts of it are, for sure.
Yeah, watching what Bane does to Gotham and who he is and what he represents is scary as hell. And I think that Bane as a villain, again, Bane got the bad rap because people said they couldn't understand what he was saying because of the sound mix. So he got put into the corner, basically. But when you watch this movie and he's Tom Hardy's presence, the way that he carries himself as Bane, he is a force. Like Dark Knight, the Joker is someone that brain for brain, you don't really want to go up against, and he's a chaos agent, so he doesn't have a care in the world, and he'll just destroy everything. But if you caught him, you could probably beat the shit out of him real quickly. Right?
Yeah.
You're not going to do that with Bane. And that's shown. I mean, it's a classic comic book thing where Bane ends up breaking Batman's back, and Nolan put that right in the middle of his concluding chapter here. Mm-hmm. And again, I think, stuff in the screenplay, I think there were just so many outlandish things that people kind of got caught up in trying to decipher or going, oh, come on. Like, how does Bruce Wayne get back from the hole that he's in? How does he get back to Gotham with everything cut off, right? Like, well, he is Bruce Wayne. He probably has some connection somewhere to be able to get back there. So people got caught up on that. People get caught up on like, well, how does he make the flame bat signal on the building? How does he manage to do that? Like, give yourself, it's a comic book movie. Relax.
Yeah.
And a big one at the end. How does he get out of the atomic bomb situation? Right? There's a book that I've actually just been given that I've just started to work my way through called Nolanverse.
Oh my!
Yeah, it is. Well, it's really, but it's specifically it's a short book, and it's basically a long form essay on The Dark Knight Rises. And I haven't finished it yet. Hold on. The author's name is Robert E. Elliott. It's called Nolanverse: Exploring the Greatest Illusion in Movie History, and what it's an unauthorized new analysis of The Dark Knight Rises. And what it seems to be heading towards is the idea that Batman does actually die at the end of the movie. I haven't got there yet. I don't know if I'm going to agree with it, but I'm willing to take the journey to see what a Nolan head comes up with to justify such reasoning. He lives, as far as I'm concerned. Indiana Jones can survive the cliffs and all that stuff, and all that stuff. I think that you gotta give yourself over to it, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But again, I haven't read the books. I'll leave his theory for later. But I think people get caught up in some of those details that they neglected a lot of the bigger things that Nolan was going for with this movie. And I think that, again, his action scenes get better.
Yes.
That whole assault with all the police and the Bane's people, or the prisoners, all converging there for that big fight on Main Street is incredible. The whole scene with the Batwing chasing the trucks, I think, is maybe arguably one of the best action scenes, pure, like, full-on action scenes that Nolan has ever put together.
Sure.
I think it's fantastic. And the ending always gets me. I mean, the ending, which is set up for The Dark Knight, the whole idea that Bruce Wayne is looking for an heir, a successor, someone where he doesn't have to do this anymore. He thought it was going to be Harvey Dent, and it turned out to not be the case. And here he ends up with the Joseph Gordon-Levitt character.
Yeah, it's Bruce Wayne is basically Willy Wonka.
Okay.
Yeah, he's looking for his Charlie Bucket, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he finds it at the end of the movie. Again, there's a couple clunky dialogue moments. There's the whole Ben Mendelsohn thing about the clean slate thing.
Yeah.
That is one of the like oh my god, like pieces of exposition.
I will say, like, I don't want to say it's similar to my feelings on Spider-Man 3, but it's like there's almost too much. There's almost too many characters, and I mean, even the Marion Cotillard stuff. I mean, like, it just felt overstuffed. I mean, like, and at the same time, it's not like I tune out or get really angry at or like I have a reaction to something where I'm like, oh, well, that didn't belong or that shouldn't be there. It's mostly just like, this is a lot of movie.
It's a lot of movie. It absolutely is a lot of movie, and I dig it for that. I mean, that's a movie that it goes for it, but it doesn't sacrifice its ideas in just cheap thrills and trying to wrap a whole bunch of stuff up. The ideas are carried over from the previous movies, and I think it's a scary ass movie. I mean, Dark Knight. There's an intensity to The Dark Knight that I think is very almost unmatched in a lot of contemporary thrillers and action movies. But The Dark Knight Rises is a scary ass movie. When you count, I mean, that whole, again, the implosion of the football field.
Oh yeah,
all the bridges being exploded at the same time. I don't, however that was achieved through visual effects, it's flawless. It looks fantastic, and you just sit there like, oh my god, like we're screwed. And that's sometimes we feel like that today. So
yeah, we might. Let's hope we don't feel that way in November.
We won't. We won't.
Okay.
I'm going on record. We won't.
Okay.
But prepare. Anyway.
Yes. No, I'm not saying that, again, like, even putting it at 9, I part of me is like, that's probably why, like, I would move it up a notch. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
But what would be your number 8 then?
Well, my number 8 was Dark Knight Rises.
Oh, okay, I see.
My number 9 is Dunkirk.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my number 8. So
see, there we go. And Dunkirk is another movie that I actually put on while Morgan was watching it. I think it was a little bit behind her. Trying to make the case that that movie is, again, the intensity is what that movie is all about. How riveting it is to be put in those situations, and people want to argue that the time jumps and all that stuff that he does in the movie. I think that's purposely keeping us off kilter, and the way that if you were a soldier on the ground, time doesn't move when you're trapped in a situation like that. When you don't know your way out, time doesn't exist. It's just hoping you get the next second, let alone an hour ahead. So, and again, it's just so masterfully put together. It's maybe it's simplistic in that way, but just again as a technical achievement and telling the stories from all those different points of view, and yet there's a triumphant nature to it, and there's a real emotional core to it, and ordinary people are lost along the way, and. I watch it again. It's the shortest movie too, other than like Following and Memento, right? I think it's under 2 hours.
Yeah, that's a big plus for me.
Yeah, when I watch it again, I'm like, oh, that's right. This is under 2 hours. Like fantastic, and it just flies by. It just flies by
because there's a lot of planes. So
yeah,
that would make sense. No, I didn't get to revisit this one recently, and I wish I had. But I mean, I do feel strongly about it. In that, again, like I was surprised that a lot of people sort of wrote it off the way you were talking about, and kind of like reducing it to it being minor Nolan and everything. But like, okay, so yeah, he does time displacement and does the challenging narrative structure, but this also has little to no exposition. It is like a streamlined. It's not even so much a war movie. I think even he said it wasn't really a war movie to him. It's more a story about survival and resilience and like just. But like, I love the 3 points of view structure. I like that, like you were talking about, in this situation, you would feel a sense of displacement. You would feel. Because in an actual war, there is constant unpredictability, and that feeling has to be jarring and dizzying and confusing while you're in battle, and like having to react to so many different things going on. And the 3 times I've watched this in the past, I feel shell shocked at times. Like I'm just kind of like, holy crap! It is a little similar to what I feel, especially in the opening of Saving Private Ryan. I feel a lot of that throughout this movie. And, that's certainly by design. And I think people sort of frowned upon, like, oh, there's less emphasis on character, and that kind of bugs people. It's like, oh, a lot of these people are just ciphers. I don't really get to know who they are. But, I mean, in this world, I feel like that's justified. Like, just in terms of how you tell this story, and of this, like, the word I kept going back to watching it was immediacy. Like, you're just thrown in there. And you're spending 100 minutes or so in this situation and you're feeling it. Like, this is a movie that I feel a lot of anxiety watching it. And then, like you said, it does have a sense of triumphant, I just love the ending. I mean, I don't know how other way to say it, and I think a lot of his endings are kind of uplifting. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's, some people can sort of frown upon that too, but I mean, I get a lot of thrills out of watching Dunkirk, and it's one that I'm like, yeah, I should have gone back to watch it just because it's one of the shorter ones, and I do own it on 4K, thankfully, and I'm very happy about that, and I will watch it again probably in the near future, but I also don't get the emotional highs that I do with some of the other ones coming up. But again, like, I still think this is an incredible work of art in of itself. So,
yeah, you look at all of his movies, and the way he edits his final minutes. There's a similarity between all of them that's kind of become comforting in a way. And like go back to Dark Knight Rises, like the entire build up to the reveal that Batman may still be out, that Bruce Wayne may have survived and may be out there. That hope that exists is so. I mean, like a really real warm blanket, and then knowing that someone is going to take his place, God forbid something, comes back and is, bad again and whatnot. Like, Gotham is a place you do not want to live, man. I mean, I love it. He keeps making that point of how shitty it is to live in Gotham until Batman came around, and then Bane just destroys all his progress in one flip. And another thing that I noticed, I mean, when you mentioned the January 6th thing, there's also a scene, you want to talk about being ahead of the game, not that this hadn't happened before this movie came out, but, I mean, there's a scene where Bane takes his knee and puts it on the neck of a black man.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, again, I'm just saying that's just another thing that you just go like, oh, Jesus Christ. And just like he's, for people who complain that Nolan might be like a cold filmmaker in the same way that Kubrick is, there's the one that he gets compared to a lot. I think he has real empathy for so many of these characters that he puts on, and if he's not always up to the challenge in the moment to like express his own sense of feeling, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but just like if he doesn't quite communicate it to the point that we get emotional about it, maybe that's something he's working on himself. Again, we all process things in different ways, but I think that more and more he's gotten better at it over the years, and even right up to Oppenheimer. It's just I think that there's a fear that exists throughout so many of his films. And sometimes that fear can supplement empathy that we feel. That maybe we should feel fear first, but feel empathy for the people caught up in that fear.
You mentioned the word fear, and that word comes up quite a bit in my number 7 choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think after we talk number 7, we'll sort of like, because we'll be halfway at that point, I guess, right? We'll sort of like we'll sort of like come to our consensus, at least with the first 6 titles. But I think a lot of the things that some people who have issues with the Batman movies pop up every once in a while, and like for me, spelling out themes through dialogue has always irked me to a degree, and like yet I like the things that are being said. So there's like a little conflict there with me, like just a little back and forth, a little kind of a bumper car ride experience when like, okay, we get it, fear, it's gonna eat you alive, or like a lot of the things that come up throughout the Batman movies, like even just once we get to Dark Knight, the Joker's talking about being an agent of chaos and all that. There's moments like that where I can roll my eyes, but I also don't mind it because I agree with what's being said to some degree. And so my number 7 is Batman Begins. And, we talked a lot about this one in the last episode, so people can refer back to that. I listened to it and I was like, oh yeah, we did talk a lot about Batman Begins. I was surprised. But I think that was just because, like, Patrick hated it for the most part. And I agree with Katie Holmes being the weak link here.
Sure.
And, but it's weird. Like, he talked about the cinematography being terrible, and I was like, I don't really see that. I think it looks great. I think throughout all of his films, the cinematography is one of the strengths. And just, again, like, I was watching this, just sort of like coming to terms with, this is an origin story that actually works and is not like all exposition. It's not just all setting things up. There are some really effective moments, but again, like, sometimes I do walk into these movies with an origin story baggage where I'm just like, all right, I want to get to the good stuff. And of course, in the sequel, there's a lot of good stuff. And, I think that there's been critiques about his fight choreography, and I think that's, I don't think it's terrible. I just don't think, like, he cuts a little bit too much in the very first confrontational fight in the alleyway when he's coming across Tom Wilkinson and his goons back there. I think it's a little sloppy, but not to a degree where I think it's a strike against the movie or anything. And I think just watching this too now, rewatching it now, I was thinking, like, this is more in line with the recent Batman, that we got with Robert Pattinson. This is more along those lines, and I like this tonal balance. I certainly like it more than even just the first two Burton films. I think this is just better than I initially thought. But I think it's far from perfect and sort of pales a bit in terms of what's to come. And again, I think that we're talking about, going back to a movie after even better, more incredible works came along. So I always try to, like, think of that in terms of when I'm watching this now. Like, you're watching this, and yet that there are better things down the road. And I'm not going to dismiss this either. But if you go back to that first iteration of our Nolan conversation, I was more or less just like, yeah, Patrick, you're right. This movie kind of sucks. But I don't think that's true. I actually think it's very good.
I mean, I probably said this on the previous show, but I mean, this was Nolan's, not counting following, his sort of third shot at the bat, no pun intended. And the third time up to bat is what I meant to say. And I remember watching this movie in the theater with the same kind of, like, do we need another Batman movie?
Yeah.
They did the Batman stuff. They kind of ran into the ground. Okay, we're going to let Nolan give it a shot. We're going to take this guy who's made these two really interesting crime movies, and we're going to unleash him on Batman. Okay, let's see what this is about. And at the end of that movie, a friend of mine and I looked at each other at the very end, and Batman Begins comes up on the screen, and we both at the same time said, that is how you do a Batman movie. We were enraptured with how great it was. I think that the screenplay is great. I think as an origin story and getting into the real, because the whole Bruce Wayne origin story has been done to death over the years, and has become parody at this point. And yet there's a real sense of how that has affected him over the years. Yeah. And I love all of that gritty, grimy stuff where he's traveling abroad trying to find himself and all the training and stuff like that. That stuff is so good. And then coming back to Gotham and like showing you how he becomes Batman, which is something we never got before. True. We never got, the television series, he was just, he was Batman. When Michael Keaton, he's just on the roof. He's Batman already. We know that his parents get killed and that's what led him to doing that. But we never saw him get the Batmobile. We never saw him, crafting the Batarangs and stuff like that, putting the suit together, like how all this military grade stuff that he has to come up with. Oh my God, that stuff is also great. And then it has those very simple messages that you talk about. I think we're trained as critics sometimes when we hear things that seemingly are so on the nose that we tend to dismiss them because we go like, oh, well, why couldn't you show that visually, or why could you be a little more subtle?
Show don't tell.
All this stuff. We're trained in our brains to think that way. And yet sometimes some of the best memories we have are movies that lay it all on the table in a single line, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that just happens. And it happens, and it's not an accident. It has to be done a certain way for us to accept it. And I think that it works so many times in this movie. The whole, why do we fall, Bruce? So we learn to pick ourselves back up. What a great simple message for everybody to have. And it all just works for me. The score works. All the new iterations of the Batman. I happen to love the Batman story as it is. So like I said, I watched the Gotham television show, all of it in its run. That's how much I like Batman. So it's just, I think that all of those stories are very interesting, and I thought he knocked it out of the park with Batman Begins, and it's my number 7, and you're number 7.
I know, right? I mean, again, like maybe it's because I can easily relate to a nerdy Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man more than I can Bruce Wayne and his money.
Well, yeah. We can't. Batman is not Batman without that money.
Yeah, no kidding.
But again, it's leading up to everything that we get to by Dark Knight Rises is that he was doing something with his money. Mm-hmm. And when he went into self-exile to, again, what he thought was helping the people of Gotham to give them a villain instead of the hero that they needed, he kind of turned his back on it, which is what you see a lot of people with money do to the rest of us, right? So we had there was a redemption story for Dark Knight Rises as well. We don't even see Batman in that movie until about 45 minutes in.
Yeah.
And shout out to young Glenn Powell in that movie too.
Oh right, I forgot about that.
He's the guy who gets beat up in pain at the stock exchange. He gets thrust on the back of the motorcycle.
Oh wow!
A little jackass he was in that movie. It's funny to see him now. But no, Batman Begins is my number 7. So this isn't quite going as you thought it was going to go.
Yeah,
Jim.
I'm
We're on agreement right now.
I'm a little surprised, but I'm also kind of like pleasantly surprised. I mean, again, I'll be curious to see once we get higher up, but I think based on what you said about following in terms of it really like sort of I probably mentioned this as being a calling card, but just like in such a like assured way, but also just not just hinting at things to come, but really sort of summarizing like this is what I'm interested in as a storyteller, and here it is, like in like a 70-minute indie film. Here it is. I think that's kind of what's making me more comfortable with bumping it up over Tenet, is what you said about following as. Yet, like, there are things about Tenet that are just damn cool to watch. So
sure,
it's really hard for me to just like ultimately pick one versus the other. What would you say is the stronger point to like cement this bottom pick so we can come to an agreement for at least the first part of the list here?
Again, it's like blueprints versus like where you started versus where you're at.
Yeah.
Right. And like you don't have the resources for following. You have a lot more resources for Tenet. It's I'm hey, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna swap them. We're gonna put Tenet at number 11, and we're gonna put Following at number 12. Like, good effort.
Okay,
Chris, good effort. We're gonna bump Tenet up to number 11 and just go with that.
I am very happy with that.
Okay.
Because again, like, I mean, I'm not bored watching Tenet, or I'm not like even. It's just
it's not boring. It's just it's weirdly engaging while it's simultaneously be disengaging. The irony of the two things, as they do a couple of times, they put your fingers together to show more forward and backward movement. That's kind of what it's like. You're of two minds, kind of watching this movie. Like the filmmaking is like amazing, but I don't know what he's doing with it. Right?
Yeah, it's like two separate parts of your brain are engaged in different ways watching that movie.
It's like maybe it's the ultimate symbol of movie going and criticism. That like on one hand you're really enjoying something, but on the other hand you go like, man, this isn't really very well made. I just happen to be really enjoying it. Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, we agreed on 10 is Insomnia. So 9. We basically have to decide on 9 and 8. That's really the next hurdle.
And I'm good either which way. I mean, I think Dark Knight Rises is a more ambitious movie. Dunkirk is arguably a better movie in its simplicity.
Ooh,
where? I mean, what do you think about this?
It's tough because I like that it.
Are you kind of equal with these two movies?
I am more excited to watch Dunkirk again than Dark Knight Rises.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm going to give you Dunkirk at 8, and we'll put Dark Knight Rises at 9 because that'll appease the haters. We'll do that. We'll throw a shout out to the haters because I want to have some more flexibility in my top 6. So
okay. Yes. No, that's a fair compromise, and thampfully, this is reflecting my list so far.
And honestly, I swapped those two when I said I was reshuffling my list today. I swapped those. Those are two that I swapped.
Okay.
8 and 9.
Yeah.
So like it was a last minute thing. It's basically on just a recent 72-hour rewatch of Dark Knight Rises that I just think it's. I want to throw one out to the haters. Just like, you should go back and watch that movie again because it's a lot better than you're giving it credit for.
And I want to watch it not on Max.
Well, I didn't even get a chance to comment on it because I ended up watching it on Max too. I threw it on my television and was watching on Max. And yes, what you said is correct. And I think part of that is because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think they ended up remixing the film a bit. I think they did it in theaters. They initially theaters because there was the preview where they showed that opening sequence in IMAX. I think before like Mission Impossible or something like that, and people said like they couldn't understand what Bane was saying, so they remixed the film. So Bane, I think, was a little bit louder. So I think that mix is what's reflected on Max. But yes, his voice is louder than the regular voices.
Okay,
it is. But I didn't have a problem with it. Maybe just because I didn't mind having it turned up. So
yeah. Well, lately I've actually started watching movies with headphones on, mainly like, I don't want to disturb my neighbors and but like I'm surprised at how immersive that can be to some degree. Like, I mean, certainly, like, I get the stereo effect really strongly when something's on the left channel versus the right channel by doing that. Sure. So I kind of like that. And I mean, Yes, I wish I had a nice big house where I had these giant speakers and could just blast it like I'm in a movie theater. But I like my setup. I'm happy with it overall. This was like one of the first time, and I know I've watched things on Max before, so it was just a weird kind of like, it took me out of the movie at some point. So that's why I'm like, well, maybe if it shows up at the movie theater again, or if I get the 4K or whatever, maybe I'll feel differently. But we'll see.
You come over one day. I will, for this like the second time in my history, I will create the drive-in experience in my backyard with my projection screen, and we'll just put it on there, and we'll put on full blast in my very quiet neighborhood and just annoy all the neighbors.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Number 6 for me is his most recent film, Oppenheimer. And I mean, I'm obviously very grateful and like I just love the experience of getting to see this in a theater. You know, certainly you were there, and I know other critics were there, and just like bring it. And I was just like so immersed into this movie and felt so just like I felt this movie from beginning to end. And yet at the same time, I had to watch this a second time because, once again, very similar to Dark Knight Rises, I'm like, that's a lot of movie. There's so much going on. I wouldn't say like it felt like an assault, but it was, if I want to use a different term, I mean, it just felt like a beautifully paced and orchestrated symphony in a way, like just different instruments playing different notes, but they're all in harmony. They're all in unison. He's juggling a lot in this movie with the plot, with different plot lines. You know, certainly the courtroom stuff is very different. The hearing stuff is very different than even just the origin story of Oppenheimer. There's just a lot of characters, a lot of things going on. But at the same time, I can't tell you, like, going back to seeing this, you know, in a regular theater opening weekend at the new 400 here with Barbie playing in the opposite theater, there was just something. I felt so happy. I was just like, people love movies again after a good long while of questioning whether even movie theaters were going to be around, and if, you know, the industry was going to just crumble or something. And so, like, I mean, I might elevate the movie a little bit based on that, but I also can't deny the fact that this is, you know, he's doing a biopic in a way that only Nolan can do it. And I can see people like criticizing, oh, it's always wall-to-wall score with this guy, and he always has to jump around in time, blah, 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 blah. But like the way he utilizes silence during that Trinity test, one of the best moments of maybe his career. I don't know. Like, so, and some of the scenes in like, maybe I just like hearings. I don't know how weird that's. Like, I like things that takes place in boardrooms. Like, that's why I love The Social Network so much. Because it does feel very Sorkin-like at times. Like, this movie is wall-to-wall dialogue in a way that I was very surprised by. And all the performances, everything about this movie still works very strongly for me. And I'm very happy that it achieved all the acclaim and critical accolades that it did. It is like quintessential Nolan in a way. Like, it's just everything that makes him so great is kind of encapsulated throughout this entire movie. And that final moment still gives me goosebumps. It still really affects me deeply. So that's why it's number 6. And yet we got other movies too that I feel just as strongly about. So I'm curious to see if this was higher for you or not.
My number 6 is Oppenheimer.
Wow, this is getting crazy. Okay.
Yeah. You know, this is about a 48-hour rewatch. Just not too long ago, I watched this for only my second time. I saw this is the first time I actually saw it again since the press screening, and it holds up remarkably. And is like only the best movies do. They get richer and more interesting on a second watch. I said to someone I was watching it with, I said, well, you know, the Trinity test, you know, happens about an hour 45 into the movie.
Yeah.
And this is a 3-hour movie. Like, the last hour of this movie are people yelling at each other in boardrooms and hearing rooms, and it's like you're watching Die Hard,
right?
You know? It's so riveting, and like the build up, and the cross editing, and like the build up to, you know, Emily Blunt's big moment in the boardroom, and the way good. That the way that, you know, Jason Clarke is, you know, seemingly entrapping Oppenheimer in certain things, and what we learn about those other people that are in there testifying, that we gotten a snippet of some things they said, and then we're like, oh no, wait, here's the other half of what they said, and now what do you think of them, people?
It's like, I like recontextualizing things like that. Yeah.
It's so great. And like, even like, and maybe it's just the way that I view the movie. I can't believe I'm the only one that thinks this, but Like when the movie starts, those first couple of moments with Robert Downey Jr., you almost think that he's going to be his ally.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. It's not until that sort of there's like a crucial moment in the during the courtroom scene, not before he does a lot of his big reveals, where he's just like, oh no, something else is going on with this guy, that he's not on Oppenheimer's team. And the way that that's revealed, and again, the sort of the petty, I mean, that all of that just comes down to just basically being snubbed. You know, he humiliated him. He said something snarky at a hearing and made him look bad. And then he did well, you didn't share what Einstein said to you. And that, like, for all of that, it was a lifelong vendetta against Oppenheimer. And if that doesn't sum up American politics in a nutshell, I don't know what else does. But yeah. But again, it's like you said, there's so many characters, and just like, you know, every time you like, oh, here's this new character, and like, oh, it's a big actor playing this, and it never feels distracting. It's like normally you bring in a lot of like big name actors to fill those roles, and it's like, oh, here's this guy, and oh, this guy, and he's going to make an appearance here, and it never feels distracting. They all feel like they're there to make their mark in the scene in a particular way, and it's just filled to the brim with fantastic actors, down to the smallest of roles, and it's all so engrossing. And you know what it says about the chain reaction. It's funny that you rewatch Tenet, and it basically has that foreshadowing, if you will, or backward shadowing, whatever it might be, where the one character tells the protagonist about Oppenheimer thinking that he was going to blow up the world with a chain reaction, and it turned out to be unlucky. Right? It's funny to go back and hear that, just like, and it makes me think that maybe someday, you know, all these, for years, even up to now, like Quentin Tarantino's 10th and final movie, you know, that whole thing, that maybe it was going to be this sort of amalgamation of the universe that he's created. That somewhere that the other characters are going to show up and pop up, and that it's all been one creative universe the entire time.
The Nolan-verse.
Nolan-verse. There it is. There's the title of the damn book. And I know that's a cliche, and that's like we're getting into like superhero territory and whatnot, but goddamn, how cool is that? That like one day, like, you know, if you're able to make it to the end of Nolan's career, and you realize that all of this takes place in this crazy universe where all of this stuff is happening. That Interstellar is the future of, you know, the Batman series, or Inception, or whatever. Inception and Tenet are two competing organizations, stuff like that. It's just, it's I mean, the mind wanders with stuff like that. But back to Oppenheimer, the performances are so good. And I mean, I think I told you last night that I saw a movie that's also a biopic-y type movie, and Oppenheimer felt 6 hours shorter. And that movie was only 2/3 as long.
Yeah.
So Oppenheimer, a great rewatch, absolutely riveting. And it always bums me out a little bit when a director that you really like has to do that kind of movie to win the Oscar. They have to do a Schindler's List.
Sure.
Right? They have to do an Oppenheimer, when any of the quote-unquote genre movies that they've done up to that point were among the best of their kind. Your Jaws, your E.T., your Dark Knight, for example, or Inception even, that they couldn't win for those movies. You have to do the big, important biopic movie. And I don't think that's why Nolan did it. Clearly, you know...
Oh, no, he's got an interest in this.
In this, he's got clear vested interest in history and this character and everything. So he just, you know, he did it. And he just made another Christopher Nolan movie, and like, oh, hey, you recognize that this is the really great one. Okay, cool. I'll go on to make the next one now.
I know. I was happy that this won. You know, I mean, yes, there are Nolan films I'm far more passionate about, and I feel like resonates more strongly with me. But at the same time, like, this is still, again, like, just kind of a great summation of his strengths, all kind of encapsulated into one film. And, you know, it's. I don't like it when people just sort of reduce things and sort of go, well, here he goes with the dead wife, or, you know, the alcoholic wife, the dead wife, or, you know, like all these things that I feel like there's more to it than that. There's far more than just like pinpointing some things that pop up every single film or whatever. And that's not even true because we'll get to a movie where that's not the case at all. But I don't know. I think it kind of bummed me out when people were dismissive of Oppenheimer as just being kind of like, oh, that's what Nolan does. Here it is. And only it's in biopic form, and
right.
I didn't feel that way. So I'm glad we're on the same page.
It is documented history in some cases. So, you know, maybe not give him shit for this one.
No, I wouldn't. Although, I will we'll certainly hear from somebody who is definitely not a fan of Benny Safdie's accent. Well, but again, it's like nitpicking. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Whatever. It's fine. Now, here's where we're going to differ. I just have this feeling.
Okay.
And it's totally okay to the point where I'm like, if this has to be higher, I'm all for it. I'm not going to be like, I'm going to argue my case, because this is a movie that everybody on the planet loves, and justifiably so. I've always found it to be a little overrated. More so on first viewing. On the first viewing, I was just kind of like, okay, why does everybody love this movie so much? After 4 or 5 viewings now, it's number 5 for a reason. So let's just see what your reaction is to me putting The Dark Knight at number 5. Because
we're not that far off.
Okay. Now, again, I'm not on the level of a certain film critic I've already mentioned, but I still often get a little perplexed to some degree. I mean, the third act for me feels a little rushed, like from Harvey Dent's transformation to those like crazy point of view shots of those surveillance like videos that Batman is using to try and figure things out. I mean, a lot of that's a lot again to me. Like I feel like, I'm back in Dark Knight Rises territory or something for me. But just about everything before that is among the best work I've ever experienced in any comic book movie. And I didn't necessarily feel that way on first viewing, but as I've watched it more and more, I've grown to love this movie more. And a lot of that certainly has to do with Heath Ledger's performance, which rightfully won all the awards possible. And I certainly felt strongly about it when I first saw it. I just think it's unlike any villain performance I've seen. And there is an astonishing chase sequence in this movie that, obviously, when you live in Chicago, it's also very cool to experience that on that level. But once it sort of culminates, once he's on the bat bike and the flipping of the semi, again, I am just like in awe of how all that was done in camera. None of this is done with CGI, people. That's the thing you have to realize too, watching a lot of these movies. A lot of it's practical. He just makes these things happen. I don't know how he does it time and time again. We'll get to more examples of that. But I think it has a couple of imperfections, mostly in the third act, that keep it from, being in my top 3, for example. But and again, we're coming from somebody who just doesn't always feel strongly about comic book movies. But this is seriously like one of the best examples of it. And a lot of that starts with that opening sequence, and it feels relentless throughout. And Heath Ledger is just on fire in this movie in a way that, it makes me giddy, and it just makes me sad watching it too now, just because we lost him so soon. And no, it's a remarkable movie. I'm like the top 5 here. I'm all like 4.5, 5-star territory for me. So. There's just no denying how incredible this movie is. It's just, again, personal taste. It's a comic book movie for me. So, hey, but I know you feel even more strongly about it, and I want you to state your case. So this could be the compromise I am more than happy to go with if you want to bump it up a notch. So,
well, let's see how the top 5 go, and we could we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Because The Dark Knight is my number 4.
Cool.
Actually. So again, I think that even though our rankings are similar, I think I do have a bigger appreciation of the movie than you do. Again, I said it earlier that I think this is, as far as intensity is concerned, very few movies I can think of. There are action movies where there are intense sequences. There are thrillers that maintain, and horror movies, really great horror movies that maintain a sense of dread and stuff like that. But as far as the intensity level that sort of begins, I think probably with that chase sequence that you referred to. Beginning of that chase sequence through the end of the movie, there's an intensity and a ratcheting up of the tension that I think is so masterfully done that few have able to match that pit in my stomach that I get while I watch this movie. And I use the word scary for Dark Knight Rises, and this one, it's just, my nerves are just clenched, because the more the Joker gets into it, the more Joker seems to be winning this war, and where it's ultimately going to take him. And yes, Batman, the public outsmarts him and whatnot, and he's caught at the end. He isn't killed. And yeah, I agree that the ending of the movie, it doesn't have like a big action-y finale, right? It has, it's got like that Bat Vision that you talked about, and it's basically just Batman working through some, henchmen trying to get the Joker. It's basically the end of Tim Burton's Batman in a way.
Yeah.
But the build up to that sequence is so masterful, and then the stuff with Harvey Dent on the roof is just kind of, it takes the wind out of you. At least it does for me, because even though it's not, a big, fisticuffs kind of thing, it's just like, damn it. Like, if we can't even count on this guy who is built up to be the White Knight, right, that if we can't even count on him to ultimately get through the dark side of his emotions and the pain that he has been caused as a result of losing the love of his life, and not to mention the love of Bruce Wayne's life, that we can't even count on him to do the right thing. And it challenges the audience too, because even he's flipping the coin and whatnot, but you started thinking just like some of these people that he inflicts his own sense of justice for, as an audience member, it's hard to reconcile that own sense of, yeah, you screwed up too, and maybe you should pay the price. And does that make us a bad person? When we get to that whole sequence with the two boats, and one's got to blow up the other, or we're going to blow up both, and ultimately people do the right thing. That's the sort of the warm blanket. You go like, oh God, I wish this was the truth. Because I think in real life, someone would have right? Like it's that comfort. It's that like, oh my God, it's the movies are not always reflective of real life. It's what we want real life to be.
That's true, but at the same time, I could not have, like, if he would have done that, if one of those boats would have blown up, I would have been like, God damn. Like, yeah, that would have been, oof. I would
have been okay with it.
Yeah.
I would have been, I would have been like, Jesus Christ, he went there.
Right.
Because I love it when movies do that. When they take like absolute, they punch you in the gut and you're left gasping for air. But yeah, no, it's just like, and again, it's just like, they got Bruce Wayne playing a detective in the movie, and which is very, in line with the original Batman detective comics and stuff like that. Figuring stuff out, which is fun. I just gotta give out a huge shout out to Michael Caine. Just the absolute perfect acting as Alfred. He's so good in all of these movies.
For sure.
And he's funny, and he's where it ultimately goes, it's heartbreaking where it ends up. He's so good. I'm so glad that him and Nolan just found a rapport together. Because again, you don't talk about warm blankets when he shows up for Tenet for one scene. Just like, hey, at least we get some Michael Caine. It's like excellent. But no, it's Heath Ledger's performance. What can you say that hasn't been said already? It's one of the greatest villain performances of all time, and the way that it's written and the way that it pays attention to the sort of the shifting origin story of the Joker over the years, and it has a little bit of fun with that. And there's a gruesomeness to it. There's a ruthlessness. There's a playful side to it. It's the exact opposite of everything that Joaquin Phoenix is doing in that shit movie that he was in.
Oh God, don't even go there.
I still think 10 and you want to as much as I love Batman as much as I hate that movie. And I still consider that was the worst performance by any actor that year, and I stand by that. But Heath Ledger may have been the best performance of that year.
I know, right? Isn't that crazy to have that sharp of a contrast? And somebody like Joaquin Phoenix, I understand people have kind of gotten tired of him, and I never really had until Joker. Like I thought I've liked most, like even when he gets all mumbly or whatever, like the arguments that people have had, like oh this Joaquin Phoenix guy has got a bag of tricks and he's kind of doing it over and over again. But yeah, man, like Joker just completely rubbed me the wrong way. In every way, and
it's got a shit filmmaker behind it too.
That's definitely true, and that's again, like especially watching all these relatively back to back to back. I think like something like The Dark Knight just stands out even stronger in terms of finding correlations and connections thematically throughout the rest of Nolan's work. It just it felt like, okay, I get it. Like the first time I watched it, I was just like, okay, yeah, that was a comic book movie. Yeah, that was a Batman movie. But no, there's more going on. There's thematic weight. There's like just again, as we've talked about, a surprising amount of darkness. I mean, certainly even just Harvey Dent's appearance. Oh my God.
Well, I mean, that is just, again, this is sort of the originality of putting which was basically turning the Batman movies into crime movies. That's really what they are. It's like Bane is not exactly what Bane looks like in the comics, and Harvey Dent's not exactly, or Two-Face is not exactly what he looks like. Certainly a lot different than Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face. Oh yeah, that movie. And even the Joker's appearance with the slits in his face is just it's remarkable. It's great.
You want to know how I got these scars? God, that every time he did that, I was just like, God damn, he is just remarkable. I mean, and again, like it's one of those movies. The more I go back to it, the more I appreciate about it, and to where, again, if we wanted to put it at number 4, I would not be unhappy. But my number 4 is where it all began, really, for me, and that's Memento. And, part of me is like, okay, obviously when we did the first Nolan episode in 2011, this would likely have been my number 1. I mean, we reviewed it at length last time, so I'm not going to go into great detail. And I think most people at this point, it's almost like talking about The Matrix or something. It's like, what else can I say about Memento? Because I think most people who have seen it, who are listening to this episode and love Christopher Nolan, know why it's so great. And, I still go back to it once in a while and find so much to think about. And like, just in terms of the psychology of Leonard, and I mean, just like the emphasis on the fallibility of memory, just like how we rely on it to basically tell our own stories, and yet memory changes over time. Like the details, the color of a car from our past may not stay the same because we may not remember specifically what the color of that car was. So I love what this movie has to say about just cognition and memory, and on top of that, it is just like, I think even Steven Tobolowsky said this is possibly the best script he ever read at that point in his life. And I totally see that, because you have the fascinating noir mystery, you have a great twist, you have great, interesting characters that have been through a lot, and we see why they are the way they are for the most part. And, you can watch this certainly as just like a cool mystery and escapist movie, but there's so much richness in theme and ideas and complexity. It's just like, I get excited thinking about Memento, to where if it was higher up too, I would be fine, because it's really where my love of Nolan began, and it really hasn't changed. I think it's just, I feel strongly about these other films coming up, and there are for personal reasons. But again, Memento's number 4. Where was it for you?
It was number 5.
Figures. Okay.
Yeah, and again, this is another one that I moved around a couple things up towards the top, but this one again, like, it's seemingly the remarkable simplicity of the gimmick, right? Like, okay, I'm going to tell my story backwards. It's going to be, and then we're going to do, and then on top of it, it's a story about memory. So as we're going backwards in time, the audience members are going to forget how they're going to have problems with their own memory and exactly what's going on, and then things will be tied together at the end of each little vignette.
We are really put in the mindset of this character.
Yeah, absolutely, we are absolutely. And I also like to think that the doctor that Thomas Lennon plays in Memento is the same that he plays in The Dark Knight Rises. I show up in The Dark Knight Rises. I'm just like, I think it's the same guy. That's part of the Nolan verse. And again, it's just, but like you said, it's like having something to say about memory. This is someone, Nolan is someone who's digging into these things that make us who we are, which is memory. You know, whenever we get to grief, which is something that Nolan hasn't really entirely explored, when we get to grief, it all comes down to memories. It's just like, well, they're never gone if you remember them, right? You know, but here's the case of someone whose memory of that person who's dead is flawed, and it's rooted in horror, basically. And so, like, how can you move on when you're put in that kind of mindset, and you're just and again, this eventually leads into Batman. Which is not someone who is necessarily out for revenge, but to put things right and to correct the painful memory of lost loved ones and have a reckoning with that. And while they think they might be reckoning it in their own mind, I think it might be a line in Batman Begins, or maybe it's Dark Knight. I think it's Dark Knight, where he references how, you know, that revenge that you're trying to get, that vengeance you're trying to get, it only grows.
Yeah,
there is no stopping it. It's like you no matter how many things you put right, you're still going to want to keep doing it, and it's never going to fill that hole in your life. And that's exactly what Memento is ultimately about. When you get down to the final solution of that movie, and it just throws you for a loop, and you're just like, oh, and then you start thinking like, wow, who have I been following this entire time? You know, and the ultimate decision that is made in the final moments of that movie is like, oh,
yeah,
you know,
it's like a morality test in a way, and
it totally is.
Yeah.
And I was just talking about Bound on my podcast, and saying how Joe Pantoliano's performance in that is one of his best.
For sure.
Memento is right in that wheelhouse too. He is fantastic in this movie. So good. I wish Nolan would work with him again in his stable of recurring actors. So good. Carrie-Anne Moss, so good. It's funny. It's exciting. It's thrilling. And again, a staple of Nolan's movies is that no matter if it's dialogue or action or plotting, there's a point in the movie where you just see him turn up the volume. You just see him turn up the pace to a point where things just start getting a little bit faster and a little bit faster. It just keeps going until you get to the end of it, and everything then slows down for a moment for you to sort of absorb it and kind of ease. It's almost like a landing of an airplane. Like, it's very intense. It's very you're coming in for a landing, and then you finally kind of glide in and you get to the ending, and then you can kind of relax and you take it all in. I could put Memento on any time and sit there and watch it from front to back.
I completely agree. It does kind of. I mean, I've talked a lot about like how most of his films have uplifting endings. If you think essentially like how this movie begins. And that being the ending, it is sad. It is just, I mean, I don't think he's ever going to break this cycle, really. You know, he's just going to keep doing what he does because that's how he's learned to define himself.
It's how he keeps himself happy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is, like, you know, we lie to ourselves to be happy sometimes, and that's essentially what he's doing. And his thirst for vengeance is the thing that keeps him going. And as a result of this, and even like when confronted with the truth of it, he's not going to remember.
Right.
So he just keeps lying to himself until he finds catharsis, but he never will.
I That's sad.
So good.
But it's so good. It's like, again, like I understand why. Like this is one of those scripts that, oh God, I mean, how do you come up with something like this and then just execute it so breathlessly and flawlessly the way he did? And at the same time, like a lot of people have accused Nolan as being humorless. There's a lot of funny stuff in this movie, and not just from Joe Pantoliano. I mean, just like, you know, things like, well, I don't feel drunk. Or, you know, oh, he's chasing me. Like, there are little moments like that are very funny.
Right.
So, I mean, this is, I mean, again, gosh, all of these could be number one by this point. But, okay, let's move on because it's going to get even more interesting. Because, like, really for me, 2 and 3 could be flipped, and I'd be fine with that as well. Okay. Because everybody knows I love movies and stories about dreams. So I was primed to love Inception. And I was so glad when this movie ended. Like, most people were like, oh, at the end. Yep. I'll never forget that sound. I'll never forget the audience reaction to that ending.
Yep.
Whereas I was like, I just wanted to applaud because I feel like that was the perfect way to end this movie. And maybe it's like, okay, yeah, it gives you but I think that's exactly it. It gave me so much food for thought. It gave me a lot to talk about with people. And it was not just about the ending. It was just, there's so much about, and it's not just about dreams. It's about grief and what it does to a person to where he wants to constantly escape. And, you know, I mentioned this as a joke too. It's like there's an interesting correlation in the year 2010 for Leonardo DiCaprio between this and Shutter Island. Because they both, again, I know people groan when you mention dead wife, but they're a part of both of those stories. And I think this is, you know, just something that really affected me deeply is just this idea of implanting mental instability into another person. You know, just like once you find out what he did to his wife, I get so like, I start cringing at the thought of doing that. Like the fact that he probably did that for good intention, but just
I don't think there's anything malicious about what he does because she was like, her mental instability was already kind of off the rails because she wanted to stay in the dream world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and he was a husband. He was tired of it, so he wanted to like, get out of here, honey. Let's go. But I don't think that he didn't mean to do what he does and affect her in that way, but it was kind of inevitable. Yeah, and
it's just, I just get sad, and I think a lot of people have kind of wrote this off as being too exposition heavy. I think even that was brought up last time we talked about it. I love everything that's said and that's described. And I think we would be completely lost too if we weren't privy to like what they're trying to deal with. And also, you know, Elliot Page's character is new to all this. So, I mean, a lot of them are new to all what's taking place. So they need an explanation, you know, so there's a lot. I think there's an argument to be made that's pro the dialogue in this movie as like, even if it's being spoon fed to the audience, I still think it's necessary to understand what's going on. And whereas in Tenet, it doesn't work, here, it absolutely works. And I'm compelled by what they're talking about. And I'm so intrigued by this world and just the ideas. And, you know, you can certainly dismiss it, and you know, as just okay, everything's being explained, and I get tired of that. But man, I love this movie so much the more I go back to it. And that the ending to me, again, is positive. I see it as closure. I see it as Cobb letting go. I see it as him getting to be with his kids. There's no ambiguity there. That top starts to topple over just a little bit. So I think that's an uplifting ending here for me. And some people want to just claim ambiguity. A lot of people get mad at the fact that we don't see the top topple over, but I don't think we need to. I think we get enough there. So, but this could easily be switched with my number 2 because I love both of them pretty much equally. Because I'm always just amazed after they're over. I just kind of go, oh, how did he do this? How did he pull this off and make me so happy watching it? That's all there is to it. I get so like I turn into a kid again.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning of the show we talked about like people having definitive views on certain things and challenging that or saying that like that's not the right approach. I'm willing to die on the hill with the ending that you just cobbled together, no pun intended, because I think it's pretty Batman survives, Dark Knight Rises. I think that's pretty clear. All reference to the book, I'll read that later. But in this one, it's made very clear in the course of the movie that the dream top never topples. It spins constantly and perfectly, and it never topples. When the thing starts to topple, that's when Nolan tells you, see, movie's over.
Yeah.
He made it. He made it.
He's back in reality, and he gets to see his kids' faces. So
yeah. I mean, I appreciate everyone's takes on this. I think a lot of them are really fascinating. There's a lot of detail and stuff that Nolan puts into his movies. And I think that this one, again, the exposition stuff never bothered me because, like you said, and that it sounds like a criticism, just like, well, if you didn't have the exposition in there, the audience would be lost. But you're taking them into a world that they've never been in before.
Right.
Not a lot of people have studied dreams. Nolan clearly knows something about it and knows, the intricacies of what it's like to be in the subconscious like that. And then he spins a fanciful, fantastical narrative around it, and you accept it. And so, like, every time, just like, Cobb takes Ariadne through the dream sequence, and she changes stuff, and she's changing stuff, and she's like, why are all these people bumping into me? He's like, it's my subconscious. I can't control them. It's like all those things, that stuff is dropped throughout. And then, Joseph Gordon-Levitt tells you stuff, and Tom Hardy tells you stuff. Cobb tells you stuff. Ariadne is like figuring stuff out as she goes. And then she kind of becomes therapist to Cobb.
Yeah.
At a point.
Especially towards the end, yeah.
Yeah, and trying to work through his demons and stuff like that. I think there's some alternate theories that so much is in his mind that he's actually sitting on a couch this entire time, and she's actually taking him through his own subconscious and whatnot. Again, there's a lot of fanciful narratives you can spin through this thing, but the point, I mean, it's so tightly put together, and it is so beautifully spun, again, no pun intended, and every single piece of this puzzle works in the way that I don't think Tenet does, because Tenet is dealing with something that you really kind of have to go, wait a minute. And here, when it's laid out to you, go like, oh, okay. It's very easy to accept. Like, this is what's going on. This is what happens. Like, okay. You don't have to know quantum physics and the version of time displacement and
entropy and all that. Yeah.
Entropy and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, okay, you're in the dream world, so things are going to be a little strange already. So you broaden your scope into what your mind will have a suspension of disbelief about, right? You're not dealing always in the real world. So when you're put into that position, for them to go like, okay, well, you can't wake up with this, and you're in the inner ear and 4 different dream levels. I mean, it's funny sometimes when he puts in those little moments of dialogue where he feels the audience is saying it at that point. There's a point where Ariadne goes like, wait, what level are we going into now?
And you know what? On top of all that, this is just a damn cool movie. It's like you see that zero gravity fight in that hallway into the hotel room, and you just lose your mind.
Yeah,
because he's not doing this again with computers. He like built some rig or some shit like to make that work.
And again, you get it. You understand why it's happening that way. You understand with the editing that the van is turning upside down, so they have no control over the body. So there's a loss of gravity in those moments. And again, the time stamps between each level and whatnot, which is something that appears in another movie we're going to be talking about. That the displacement of that, and you get it. It's all laid out for you in that first hour. So when the action starts moving at such a furious pace, you understand everything that's happening going forward. Every single thing that happens, you get it. Even when you're surprised, it takes you a moment. Like, okay, I get why that's happening. Why is there a train there? Then you figure that out later. So it's so tightly put together, and I can't believe, Jim, that this lost to the King's Speech for screenplay.
Oh my God!
Lost to original screenplay to the King's fucking Speech.
Oh my God! I'm so angry.
It's one. Memento lost to Gosford Park.
Okay. Well, no. Memento's a better movie. Of course,
it's a better screenplay. It's a better movie.
Yes.
And this is a better movie than the King's Speech.
Well, that's obvious. I think anybody with any brain would pick that up. I would hope. That's just shocking to me. But yeah. But you know what? It's. Whew, this is getting real. I mean, this is really something else here because, again, like I'm so surprised by how high my number 2 is. I mean, because like again, third, fourth viewing, it finally all clicked together that this is also one of the all-time great movies, and the fact that people have dismissed it is kind of sad. And from opening shot to the final moment, I can't think of a more perfect summation again of why Nolan is one of our great filmmakers than The Prestige, because it is a magic trick. It is like, it has so much to say about storytelling, filmmaking, and like it comes across to me as very personal for Nolan. I mean, I guess you could look at the brother angle to some degree, but just like the desire to combine showmanship with craft and originality. I mean, I'm sure these are things that he's wrestled with himself personally when it comes to his work. And just like, okay, admitting to stealing your other ideas to make them your own. And this is, again, a movie that does a lot of show don't tell, and we understand what's happening, why it's happening, and it's existentially complex in a way, because I sort of just said, first viewing, that was very entertaining, that was a cool movie about magicians, but then later on you really start to pick up on a lot of stuff if you rewatch this. If you go back to this movie and start seeing the pieces fit together in more interesting ways, I don't know. I am so on board with this one more with you, like, because when you came on to that last, the first time we did Christopher Nolan on this podcast, I almost was sitting there going, okay, Erik, sell me. Like, what makes this movie so incredible? Yeah. And you definitely did, but it really took, like, I had to do this on my own. You know what I mean? Like, I had to have my own private, personal experience with The Prestige over time, and sort of just go, you have completely wowed me by this entire film. Mm-hmm. Because again, like, things are set up right away, and you, again, like, I can't get over how well written this movie is. And I know people, again, will like sort of harp on the dead wife and how the female characters are sort of relegated to just serving as, motivation for these two characters. But, I think the performances are great all around. I really have no issues with this movie. I think, and the fact that I listened to like a 2.5 hour podcast that sort of debated whether or not the machine actually worked. was fascinating to listen to. It really was, because, like, to me, I feel like we get proof that that a clone is made and that the machine works. He actually shoots the clone.
Yes.
So, but it was interesting just to hear people argue over this movie in the way that they did. That's something I could send you if you ever want to listen for fun. But anyway, this is, again, this is probably the biggest surprise for me in terms of placement. But the most recent we watched, as I texted you, like, this just gets better and better. And I wish more people would discover this movie and realize that it's among his very best.
I mean, it's my number 2 as well. And it's just, I mean, again, I have a real attachment to this movie because of my views on it, and which, like,
you got it right away, pretty much.
I mean, seriously. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not trying to, blow my own horn or anything. But, like, I remember, like, coming home from the press screening and being on the train and, like, walking to my car. I still remember, like, walking from the train to my car, thinking about elements of this movie, and then piecing together all the various themes that I think a lot of people have taken for granted in this movie and what this movie is ultimately about. I mean, religion plays a big thing in a lot of his movies, whether it's being dismissed or it's something to think about. And there's still another movie to talk about where it's very prominent, and I think a lot of people realize how prominent it is in that movie as well. But as I told you as my theory on this movie, is that it's all about science versus religion in the same way that Contact is all science versus religion. And
amen to that. Yep.
Two things, right? And the idea that I've always said that this movie is in many ways a metaphor for the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because resurrection plays such a role throughout this movie. I mean, one of the final shots of the movie is someone being hung and then immediately apparently appearing far away, alive and well. Right? Mm-hmm. Seemingly dead and buried. And there's someone gets buried alive in this movie and is, rescued and stuff like that. So there's a lot of themes. I mean, the whole idea of, him going into the machine and disappearing and appearing somewhere else fully formed is part of that theme. And people do die in this. But it's about, the entertainment factor of magic and what we're willing to put our minds through and to believe for a moment of either entertainment or comfort or whatever it might be. And then here, comes along science, real magic, as they say in the movie, light bulbs, electricity. It's no mystery that there's a side trip into the whole feud between Edison and Tesla in this movie that mirrors the two antagonists in the movie feuding with each other over how they're going to gain their make their way in the world with their audience and whatnot. I mean, there are so many interesting things happening in this movie, duality, and like you said, very much like Inception, which is very much a metaphor for filmmaking. It's just like, if you want to do Inception, you want to put something in someone's mind, you have to have imagination, right? Yeah. How many movies do we watch that don't have no imagination and you forget about them?
And we often think of the magic of the movies, right. Like we're sitting down, wanting to be amazed and see almost like a magic trick before our eyes.
Yeah, we go into movies wanting that experience. That we go into a magic show. We don't necessarily care how it's done all the time. We always wonder, well, how did he do that? We're never going to figure out the answer, and that's part of the fun of this movie as well. But in this movie, although the movie opens, with the words "Are you watching closely?" which becomes the theme throughout the story, Michael Caine, in the middle of this movie, tells you the ending of this movie.
Yeah.
He tells you the ending of this movie, and as an audience, what do? We say, get out of here. We dismiss the smartest guy in the room, telling us what the ending of this movie is because we don't want to believe that the magician is giving away his trick that early.
Right.
And at the end of the movie, it turns out that he's exactly right. He called it. Michael Caine calls it halfway through, and we're like, oh shit, he told us.
Yeah.
And how many times are we told? We're given a certain truth, and we don't believe it because we don't want to believe it, even though it is the truth.
And you go back to this movie. There's so many interesting hints. I'm sure there's plenty of YouTube videos out there that point them out. Even just the opening with all the birds, and there's a point where the little boy is seeing a magic trick involving a bird, and the little boy goes, "What happened to his brother?"
Yeah. What happened to his brother? And then his brother ends up in a cage.
Yes.
And he doesn't escape. Right? So it's just all those things are so good, and just and it's a really great adaptation of the Christopher Priest, I think is the name of the author who wrote the book. It's a really good book, but it's very different in structure. Mm-hmm. There's a wraparound story involving people hearing the story. It's almost like a Bridges of Madison County, like people being told the story of the two magicians, and I think Borden is more of the protagonist, and Borden is the protagonist, and Jackman's character is very much a dick. Like from jump, he's a dick, and we know he's a dick. So we're kind of on the side of Borden through a lot of it. But yeah, it's a great adaptation. It's one of the great screenplays. It was my number one movie that year. I remember surprising a few people with that, and it's to this day I have a very just personal connection to how much I love this movie. It's one of my absolute favorites,
and rightfully so. Especially once you go back to it and you pick up on a lot of different things going on in the movie. And I guess I just like the science versus religion theme in general. I just like the debate. I like to think about it. And certainly this movie touches on it in very interesting ways. And like I said, also, it's just damn entertaining. These performances, too, by Jackman and Christian Bale. They're so good at playing different variations of themselves, in different ways. One of them's practically just silent for the whole movie, to where you don't even realize it. You don't.
It's one of those great. I always talk about the movie Sleuth has a twist very much in the same vein, but which has Michael Caine in it. But in that movie, it's so obvious, and it's a twist that I bet played really great on the stage, where it initiated, where you're a little further back and you can't see it. But when it happens in the film version, even though it's still a good movie, when it happens in the film version, you kind of go oh well, I know who that is.
Right.
It's not as obvious in The Prestige. Once it's revealed to you, you kind of go oh Jesus, it was right there in front of me the entire time.
Yeah.
But when you're kind of into the way that he crafts the movie and edits it, you're not like Michael Caine says, you're not thinking about what the solution is. You just want to be entertained. You just want to be amazed by it.
And I feel like I'm amazed by the majority of Christopher Nolan's work, and certainly, I guess I wasn't 100% sure if we were going to land on the same number one or not. And I'm
Spoiler alert.
What?
We didn't. Spoiler alert.
Oh, wait a minute. How did I miss? What? Huh?
I didn't tell you what my number 3 was.
Oh, crap. Okay.
That's okay. Because I knew where we were going. I was going to let it play out, and then we can debate it afterwards. But my number 3 is your number 1, and your number 1 is my number 3.
Wow. This is exciting.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
I can't. I'm overwhelmed. I'm watching video right now of my son and my daughter years into the future. So I'm gonna lose it. I'm gonna lose it.
Okay, let's take a little moment here and then.
It's the Earth is dying. And we're gonna and I don't want to just like reduce this to like, oh, global warming and humans are gonna starve, and it's gonna get like this and how it's portrayed in this movie. But I don't know. You can again, this is one of those movies. Look at it at a macro level. That plays out very effectively, and just in terms of what's happening to humanity. But you could certainly just focus on the fact that, much like another favorite science fiction movie of mine, involves a father-daughter relationship. Gee, I wonder what that is. Yeah. And a connection through space and time, all that. Yeah, I mean, there's just that element that makes... like, this movie, as much as I love all the other ones, this movie makes me cry. And maybe that's ultimately why it became my number one, especially once we saw this in 70 millimeter at the Music Box. I think I was sitting right by Nick, and we were just gone. And I mean, I often watch this too going, why does this have such a profound effect on me? I mean, I know I have to, like, I'm doing this Substack now where I write about my favorite films, and it's almost like me trying to like be my own therapist, like trying to figure it out, like, okay, what is it about? Why is this a favorite? Why does this resonate so strongly? And a lot of it has to do with just the fact that everything about this movie works for me. Like everything from the score, to the scene I just talked about, where the father gets to play back the video messages, to what Anne Hathaway's character says at one point that also makes people's eyes roll. I don't care what she says about love. Again, spelling out the themes maybe to the audience, but it works for me. My favorite Dylan Thomas poem, it's kind of an easy go-to, but I love that Michael Caine delivers that here. And the fact, yeah, and the fact that I mean, I don't know, maybe, again, like, just because I got so tired of people harping on this from his other work, but the fact that both Anne Hathaway and Jessica Chastain get to really shine here and not just serve as motivations for those male characters. I think this movie just, like, affirms meaning and purpose with love. And that's like a simple summation of it. Just like, oh, yes, love transcends space and time. Okay. But I guess I kind of buy that, and I feel a lot of emotions watching this movie, and yet I get caught up in the science element of it. I think just what he eventually goes through in the black hole and everything, like, I mean, I get goosebumps when he's pounding on the wall and like telling himself basically not to go. I don't know. It's a really profound movie for me. It really is. It became not only my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, but just like in my top 50 movies of all time. So I absolutely love everything about Interstellar. And if it plays at a movie theater, I will rush out to see it again, because it is truly a special work of art that, like, I mean, even if you just turn on the score, I might just get the chills. Really. I love everything about it. And I totally understand if you feel that it should be lower too, but I'm sort of fighting for this as being just maybe on the simplest of levels, because I feel such a strong emotional connection to it. That's why it's number one.
I get that. Just for the record, my number one is Inception, as we mentioned. I think that is... I think Inception, I mean, it's sort of right in the middle of Nolan's career, and I think that is sort of the encapsulation of everything that he does so well. It's like, The Prestige has like these big ideas that I love, and like Inception has all of that stuff, plus like incredible technical filmmaking at a big budget level. That's is true. Something that I think is so hard to pull off. And that same argument can be made for Interstellar as well. I mean, as far as science fiction movies that have that curiosity about what is out there, and in this case, there's a necessity that it's not just what is out there, but how we can use it to make our lives better, or just to survive, for that matter. And I think about all the shit that I get for some of the filmmakers that I happen to be favorites of mine, like Nolan, like Zemeckis, like Spielberg. Is it a coincidence that those three made three of the best science fiction movies about this very type of topic in Close Encounters, Contact, and now Interstellar? That can't be a coincidence. There's a love, and clearly, Nolan is paying homage to 2001 in many respects as well. But I mean, this was my number one movie that year, so clearly I love it. When I watched it again the other day, it jumped up on my list, and I think because of all those things that I said about Inception too. It's just like it's there's an emotional gravitas to this movie. The way that it's set up, like you really feel the Earth is dying. It's not like the Earth's dying. There's a disaster here and whatnot. There's something far scarier about the way the Earth is dissolving in this movie than there is in something like Armageddon, or Day After Tomorrow. There's the weather's going to destroy us all. Here it's just like we're slowly being suffocated to death by the dust. We're slowly going to be starved to death because of the atmosphere. That, again, this movie is scary. This movie is very scary. And watching them
put it on those face masks at one point, I was like, again, like I know it's dust. I know it's a completely different thing, but still.
Yeah, masks play a big role in Nolan's movies. It's a sort of an untapped theme. Even in Tenet, they have to put on the oxygen mask.
You're right,
the inversion. But this one, again, it maintains this one where it uses religion not as a cudgel. It doesn't use it as something to be torn down, not necessarily entirely embraced. I mean, the whole love angle that you mentioned, love is a great motivator, but at the same time, love can also make you do stupid things, which is what we do that all the time too. So both of those things are happening in this movie, and in this movie, he's using religious symbolism in many ways. I mean, the whole project is called the Lazarus Project, which is spelled out for you as basically the second most famous resurrection in the Bible. It was Lazarus, and how many scientists do they send out to the various planets? Do you remember?
I can't.
12.
Oh my God.
12 disciples. 12 scientists.
Yeah, and at one point, I think even like Matt Damon's character actually says, "You brought me back from the dead, from the dead, or something."
He brought me back from the dead, and he's sort of like we'll get into that in a second. But how about this for you? That Murph, his daughter, who we see most of the first half of the movie as a child, then there's a big time jump, right? They're on this planet, and time is exponential, and so by the time they get back on their ship, like 21 years have gone by or something along those lines. So when Murph is seen again as Jessica Chastain, how old is she? She's 33.
Oh my God.
Same year Jesus Christ died, and in the Bible, there's a significant time jump. From the time that he's a baby to the time that he is the Jesus that we all know and love. So it's stuff like that I just love is included. And then, of course, you get to the Matt Damon stuff, and that's basically like the fallen angel thing, is that this is the guy that everyone sort of pinned their hopes on, and then you get there, and it's literally hell frozen over, basically.
Yeah.
Is that he's there, and then he basically becomes, you could criticize him for being a coward and all this stuff, but hey, who knows what that would do to anybody being out there for that long. I mean, I think anyone would be driven crazy and be like, no, I got the first ship, I'm hightailing it out of here in that really incredibly intense sequence.
Yeah,
and it's so, yeah.
You're gonna have to do your own Room 237 documentary at some point on like at least 3 of these Nolan movies.
I hope I'm not as crazy as some of those things. I think the stuff that I'm talking about is a little more grounded in reality. At least I hope it does. But it's just like I going back. I found my old review of this movie. Film Critic doesn't have those. Well, I think might have done this for McGill's Cinema Annual. I really got to take this and maybe post it on Letterboxd or something, because it's a pretty good review, I gotta say.
I'm sure.
To my own horn, but I was rereading it again, and some of those things I just talked about, I mentioned, and I went over. I'm just like, man, it made me like the movie again, and I'm like, hey, I wrote this. I'm like, what hell? It made me like the movie even more just reading what I said about it back in 2014. It's just the way that he handles time, and time is precious, and just again the way that they have to work with the Casey Affleck character, and his child has died and stuff like that. I mean, it's so heartbreaking, and all the way to the end. And yes, and then it comes down to a wormhole thing, and it's so good. It really is such a fantastic movie. And again, just I love those. So many space movies want to give us those Star Wars moments of the big ship hurtling through space. We love seeing those big Event Horizon type ships in 2001 and 2010 and stuff like that. But here, it kind of shows you just how insignificant we are to the grand galaxy of things when you just see that little cylindrical sphere, basically, just tiny bit off in the distance, hurtling through space. It's a remarkable little bit of cinematography and special effects there to show just how small this grand creation is, this little space station flying through Earth, through the Milky Way or this other galaxy, and like right through Saturn and stuff. And just like, oh my God, like that's just a beautiful representation.
And another movie where he sort of punctuates certain moments in space with silence. That's just quite beautiful, because again, I am also like kind of aware of the fact that a lot of his movies are wall-to-wall score for the most part, and it's not like that doesn't bother me. I don't know if it's like necessary for every single moment or every single scene of all of his work, and certainly it's not there in everything, but it's just you notice it. You notice it when he just cuts everything out, or like something like you'll hear the score and then something will explode. I think maybe even during Matt Damon's death that happens. And it's just so powerful to just do that, to just cut it and make it completely silent like that. And obviously that's kind of what probably it sounds like in space, so it makes complete sense to do it that way too.
And even in a more obvious way, to go back to the religious aspect of it, I mean, what is Murph saying that she thinks is happening in their house? She believes she's being communicated by angel, right?
Yeah, or ghost,
And yet she is someone that has been raised, more or less, by her father, who we see when he goes to the school, and we find out that they're teaching him that the moon landing was faked and stuff like that, that he's clearly raised his household to be believers in science. Yeah. So to sort of have his daughter, this relationship he has with his daughter, and to hear her talk about angels in that house is a really kind of interesting contrast. And yet we find out that her dad is her angel. Right? Yeah. And I think we can both appreciate that.
That's probably why I love this movie.
A bit of symbolism, And I mean, God, that scene where he's telling her goodbye is one of the best, like, most painful goodbye. Because you could play that so many different ways, and he's desperately trying to get her permission to leave, and he can't get it. He can't get it, and he just has to leave. And then she goes running after him, but the grandfather grabs her, and then that's the last they're going to see each other until she's Ella Bursted on her deathbed, practically.
Yeah, and just that cut, man. I swear, when he's in the truck and you hear the countdown, he's just a masterclass in editing. Like, just so many things like that throughout his entire filmography. So now we have to come to a difficult decision, because again, like, this top three could all be number one, really.
Yeah, it could be.
It really is hard to just, like, and I don't want to reduce it again to saying like, well, Interstellar really, it's such an emotional experience for me. So, because like, again, Inception is also a perfect, like when that movie was over, I just thought of, Nolan's now one of my favorite filmmakers because I just sat through this movie and was like wowed by everything about it. And it's so tight and yet it's like relentlessly paced and it's tough. Like part of me is like, well, we could just make The Prestige number 3 and sort of try and decide between number 2 and number 1. But
I think we need to amend the rule a little bit because I don't think there's any way we're going to collectively bargain what the number 1 movie is going to be unless we just said screw it and just screwed both of us and put The Prestige at number 1. But I don't think we want to do that either. I think maybe you need to create a new rule where you have to come to a collective of a top 3. And then that top 3 can be in any order you want it to be.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's really hard. I mean, I'm sure there's some cases where the number 1 movie for a director will be obvious. But I don't think, in this case, I think we have very strong opinions about these 2 I movies in Nolan's list. And
oddly enough, the 2 Christopher Nolan movies that Nick DiGiulio likes.
Oh, he likes a lot more than those 2.
Oh, that's true. No, yeah, you're right. He obviously likes Memento.
I think he likes Dunkirk, and he did like Insomnia. I don't know where he is today on some of those, but it's basically he used to say that the only movies he didn't like were the Dark Knight movies, the Batman movies. I don't think he liked Tenet, and then he clearly didn't like Oppenheimer for some reason.
I don't think he liked The Prestige either.
He was not as high on The Prestige. You're right. But I think he grew to appreciate it a little bit more. He was not high on it.
That's good.
But I don't think he said he disliked it. But yeah, it's really because like, again, like, I mean, we're talking about my top 5 here. My top 5 here. They're all my number 1 movies of that respective year. Sure. So yeah, I kind of like Christopher Nolan's work. And Oppenheimer was number 2. So, what are we talking about here? So yeah, I don't think we agreed on a lot, Jim. We agreed on number 2
more than I expected. I'm very pleased. Okay.
Yeah, we're not far off on most of the stuff, and we're not far off on our top 3. But like I can't move Inception except when maybe The Prestige on a certain day, maybe on Sunday.
Yeah.
But like Inception, I think is the perfect encapsulation of his career and one of the smartest science fiction movies I've ever seen.
That's true, and
so is Interstellar, right?
I know.
So it's like I agree with you. I think you don't disagree with me. So like, how can we? We can't.
It's funny too. You're right. I mean, like I certainly wasn't expecting even The Prestige to be number 2 on my list, only because like I love Inception so much, and like movies about dreams, forget it. Like I love movies that tackle that. It's probably why the Elm Street movies, as flawed as they are, I just think they're inventive and creative and interesting, just because they have cool dream sequences, and. So I like a lot of the themes and ideas and things about Inception. I can certainly be happy. I mean, I'm not going to ever change my personal list. Like I can't. No, Interstellar is going to be my number 1 on my personal list. But in terms of what we're doing today, I am happy to put Inception at number 1 because I can totally get on board with it, because I do think, like, pretty much, as we've been talking about, this top 3 is all tops.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, for the consensus list, I'm putting Inception at number 1. And I think the only other compromise we had along the way was I had Dark Knight at 5 and Memento at 4.
Yeah. I can switch those 2 as well.
Okay. Then that's. I think we're going to do that. I think we'll keep Dark Knight at 5 and Memento at 4, and then we'll read the entire list.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to hear from somebody who feels a little differently. What a shock. Okay, so everybody, we've come to the consensus list here. The collaborative ranking of Christopher Nolan, one of our great filmmakers. Number 12, Following. 11, Tenet. 10, Insomnia. 9, The Dark Knight Rises. 8, Dunkirk. 7, Batman Begins. 6, Oppenheimer. 5, The Dark Knight. 4, Memento. 3, Interstellar. 2, The Prestige. And number 1, Inception. I am very happy with that list.
That's a pretty good list. That's a pretty darn good list. And I don't think even the most hardcore Nolan haters and or lovers could disagree much with that ranking. There will be some, but it'll probably be in the top half. I don't think there'll be a lot of derision in the bottom half, which still has movies that are better than most people's resumes.
Well, we do want to hear from somebody who put Tenet, surprisingly, at least in my mind, higher on their list. And, you know, he was my co-host and he still is my dear friend. And the fact that he was on for the original Christopher Nolan episode, I was just curious to see, like, if he was in our position, what would be his ranking of Christopher Nolan's movies now. And I'm pretty sure, Eric, you should be able to hear this as I play it. Okay. So this is Patrick talking for a few minutes about Christopher Nolan and his ranking of the 12 films that we just ranked together.
Hey, everybody. Jim asked me to share my Christopher Nolan thoughts, and although I'm not there as they record this, I'm pretty sure that this will stand as a counterweight to the effusive praise of the rest of the episode. I like Christopher Nolan, but consider him a highly flawed filmmaker, with only a single film that isn't compromised in some core way by his hacky dialogue, his tiresome dead wife man pain motivations, his emotional immaturity, or his anemic sense of humor. That said, he's one of the only remaining mainstream Hollywood filmmakers who's capable of rendering blockbuster spectacle in a way that doesn't look like ugly, over-edited video game footage, so I'm stuck of a fan of his, whether I like it or not. Here's my ranking of his movies, with the note that I didn't rewatch anything in preparation for this episode, so some of these are going off of 15-year-old memories. Number 12 is Following. I remember nothing about this, and I don't think there was anything about it worth recommending. Number 11 is Batman Begins. The only good thing about this are the incredible Gotham soundstage sets. The idea that people considered this ugly trash a smart alternative to superhero movies that came before implies a wild cognitive dissonance that should be studied in medical journals. Number 10 is Interstellar, because I love you so much that I refuse to be the least bit of an adult about your work that is both vital for the planet and that you are passionate about is always going to shut me out from your characters, and the plot is just too long and shaggy. But the vibe and score are both quite good. I've only ever seen this in theaters, and as a result, I still have no idea what the final lines of dialogue are. My number 9 is Insomnia. I remember this being a well-made thriller. My number 8 is Oppenheimer. I think Nolan is able to communicate the weight and urgency of a historical moment through pure showmanship and sensation, which is very good because it stumbles whenever it tries to develop ideas into something more meaningful. There are a lot of great performances in this, which only emphasize why people should stop casting Benny Safdie in things. He is a bad actor, even when acting in his own accent. Number 7 is The Dark Knight Rises. It's dumb as rocks, and its politics are so hilariously reactionary and conservative that it inspires more pity than offense. It's like, Occupy Wall Street is not coming for you, Chris. Just relax. But, as I said previously, Nolan is one of the only Hollywood filmmakers capable of rendering proper blockbuster spectacle, and this feels relatively unclenched compared to Begins and Dark Knight, and it does the movie a world of good. My number 6 is The Prestige. It's been a long time since I've watched this because it's one that I more admire than enjoy. I think the labyrinthian narrative feels elegant compared to most Nolan scripts, and I am completely into the core idea of the need for magic in a hopeless world. So I forgive it for feeling like a super mopey version of Spy vs. Spy for so much of its running time. Number 5 is Tenet. As David Byrne says, stop making sense. This is where Nolan, whether he intends to or not, implicitly turns to the audience and goes, it doesn't matter if you walked out of Inception confused. You still enjoyed the hallway fight, didn't you? And I did. I would also struggle to summarize most James Bond films right after watching them, and this is basically just a big, sexy James Bond movie that gives the finger to Newtonian physics. I'm all about it, even if I despise the Branna Debicki? I don't know how to pronounce her last name, subplot, and suspect that John David Washington is a genuinely bad actor. Number 4 is The Dark Knight. There's a 10 to 15 minute stretch of this that starts with Batman analyzing bullets embedded in a wall, and it ends with the parade scene that is just completely incoherent. But I enjoy most everything else, and it's one of the rare Nolans that doesn't feel too long. Number 3 is Inception. Nearly all of the dialogue being exposition is really annoying, but the density of visual ideas and layers of storytelling, including for once in his life, God's honest fucking subtext, makes this easily one of the most pleasurable Nolan films. It's just cool as hell. Number 2 is Dunkirk. Christopher Nolan held my hands, he looked me in the eyes, and he said, I am going to make a movie with no clunky story or load-bearing dialogue at all. Just for you, Patrick. What a gift. The only thing to come within spitting distance of Saving Private Ryan when it comes to war action sequences. And my number 1 is Memento, which may have you saying, wait a second, you don't think this is compromised by tiresome dead wife man pain motivations? And my answer is no, because it's the only Christopher Nolan movie where the content leads the form instead of the other way around. I don't expect emotional catharsis from Nolan films. I don't come to them for that. I think he's generally pretty awful at making me feel things other than awe, but Memento is the exception. And as a bonus parting shot, I watched the first 5 episodes of Westworld. That show fucking sucks. Goodbye, everybody.
Oh, Patrick, we love you.
Jim, remember the beginning of the episode where I talked about different opinions and, not having definitive opinions and, listening to people's opinions? I take it all back.
Okay.
Take it all back. There's some nutty shit in there.
Yeah, that's why we made such an interesting pair and why he remains, such a dear friend of mine, because I'm always fascinated by his perspectives. So, Erik, where can everybody find you? And, oh, God, thank you so much for being here, for doing this. This was so much fun. I had a great feeling that this plan was going to work. I just had a good feeling about this because, part of me was like, okay, we could just talk about the Nolan films that have come out since since we last recorded. But I don't know. I just wanted to have more fun with it and do something different. And plus, it gave us a chance to sort of reiterate, some points about the other films that we did discuss last time. But also, we've certainly rewatched them more times over the years, and our thoughts and feelings have changed. So this was great. Thanks again.
No, my pleasure. People can hear me at a little place called the Now Play Network, the Movie Madness podcast, to do the reviews, and we do Blu-ray stuff, Pierre Zazinski and Steve Prokopi, and then the Friendship Dilemma that I co-host with Morgan Geyer, where we talk about male and female friendships and how they are portrayed, for better or worse, in the movies over the years. We got a big episode coming up at some point on Broadcast News. That's going to be our 25th episode.
Oh, can't wait.
Yeah, that is our next episode. We haven't done it yet. I'm hopeful and nervous about it. So that's coming up. My box office stuff you can read at Rotten Tomatoes every week. All that. And I want to give one shout out, just as I mentioned Morgan there, who also just recently, I said, did a Christopher Nolan podcast. And she hit upon something that, now looking at our list, I got to give her a little bit of props on. Because when she said it, I'm just like, okay. Because I don't necessarily agree with the negative aspect of the thing that she was saying. But her theory is that the better Christopher Nolan movies are the ones that he writes with Jonathan. And when you look at our list, the movies that he wrote with Jonathan, Memento, The Prestige, The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, and Interstellar.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the Inception kind of blows the theory out of the water because that's completely credited to, and I think that's one of Morgan's favorites as well. But like our top 5 there, that's 4 of them.
I know. I'm impressed. I also
wondering. But also coming up at Elk Grove Cinema, there's a little thing on July 31st you might want to plug.
Yeah. I think I am going to be there for that because I've never seen The Last Starfighter on the big screen.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a complete wreck, like in the best way. I'll turn into a kid, basically, really.
Well, aren't you co-hosting it with me?
I certainly, you bet I am.
Okay. I was just like, did you forget?
Oh, yeah.
Jim, you want to come down to the audience?
I'm also I will definitely plug that, too, for the next episode, which involves returning guest, who I believe we skipped last year just because he was so busy. But Mr. Keith Gordon is returning to the show.
Very nice.
Yeah,
very nice.
Yeah, he's always super nice guy.
Yeah.
We talk about underrated films from a particular decade. I basically just gave him the choice. Do you want to talk underrated films? Because we've done the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, and the 60s. And this time I just said, would you like to do the 50s or the aughts? And he went with the aughts, which was very surprising. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, that's great. Because I'm curious to do research and like actually think of... he's already provided an interesting list, and certainly there's a couple of movies on there I'm like, I don't know if I remember this being good, but we'll see. I'm excited. So, yeah, that's going to be the next episode in July with Mr. Keith Gordon, and I will certainly plug our screening of The Last Starfighter out there in Elk Grove Village. Classic Cinemas, right?
Yes, Elk Grove Cinema.
Elk Grove Cinema, yeah. Great theater. I will include a link in the show notes, and of course links to Erik's delightful podcasts. Thanks again, man. This was a blast.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.